Greetings, friends. Thank you for being with us, Steve Haworth, Steve McDonald, and Steve Blacketer for this training series for treasurers of Friends meetings and churches. So thank you all for being with us. And we are going to try and cover 10 basic things today very quickly, and hope this will provide a good foundation for friends who are already treasurers or becoming treasurers, or just want a refresher and want to understand. Let's do the introductions. I'm Della Stanley Green, co-director of the Quaker Leadership Center, and I've invited the folks that I call the three Steves to be with me today to talk about the basics of being a treasurer for Friends Meeting or Friends Church. And I will invite each of them to introduce themselves, going alphabetically by last name.
Well, I guess that would be me. I'm Steve Blacketer. I'm a retired CPA. Basically, had worked in public accounting for um, uh, 35 years or so, another 15 years in uh, management accounting. And like I said, I'm currently retired and enjoying life. Working as a volunteer for a lot of organizations.
Well, I'm Steve Hayworth, and I am still an active CPA. I would say I'm a practicing CPA. One of these days I'll get it right and I won't have to practice anymore. But um, I am the current treasurer for the Paoli Friends meeting. Have been for several years because I can't find anybody else to replace me. That once you become a treasurer, it seems to be your job to find your replacement. So, and I've not been successful with that. So, I have been treasurer of several other organizations. It seems that if you're a CPA, any organization you're involved with asks you to be treasurer. So, I've had a lot of experience of treasuring.
Steve McDonald, and I'm from Westfield Friends Church. I'm the only person that is not connected with the finances as far as a CPA. I come from a business background, and so instead of debits and credits, I'm more into budgets and what I call the big picture part of financing churches and non-for-profits. And currently, though, I am treasurer of Friends United meeting, and in my last year of that.
So I'm going to throw out there that one of the things I think of first when I think about why it's important to manage our money well, for treasurers to understand what they're doing, is that this is not simply a matter of money. This is also a matter of living our faith. And it's part of how we live our faith as the body of Christ in our meetings. And so one of the scriptures that comes to mind is about Jesus telling the parable of the talents, and how one was very faithful and went and did everything that he possibly could and brought back manyfold. And the second one didn't do quite as well, but really went out and did what he could. And the third one just buried it and was scared because thought that that was the best way to protect. And so I like to think about our meetings using money well with that as part of the context. And I wonder if you, Steve McDonald, or either of you other two Steves have any thoughts of scriptures that come to mind for you, or things that you think that this is my touchstone. This is what I think about when I think about why it's important for us to do a good job as treasurers and to care for the money in our meetings.
I just think about it as being a resource that we only get to spend once or to use once. I suppose in some ways it's renewable, but I want to make sure that we spend it wisely. And, there's lots of verses in the Bible that talk about money. There's also lots of verses that talk about taking care of the poor and the needy and to being wise. And you've got to take those three combinations together. I do not believe that And I think Quakers are pretty good at not storing up treasures on earth, but yet making sure we got enough to pay the bills at the end of the month. And that's a happy dance sometimes for some of us, but I think that it's important for us to remember that we need to be helping people today.
Yes. Do either of the other two of you want to add into that?
Well, the only thing, this is Steve Hayworth. The only thing I would like to add is just remember that what we are entrusted with is God's money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And keeping that in the forefront is important. It's not our money. It's not even the meeting's money. It's really God's that we've been entrusted with. And that's the other thing I love about that parable is each of them were entrusted with a certain amount, and it didn't happen to be the same amount. It didn't matter. The faithfulness can happen regardless of the amount. Well, thank you. Thank you all. And if you think of other things later on, please feel free to add them in. So I'm going to talk with Steve Haworth about the things that we talked about next are checks and balances, the kinds of protections that need to be set up from the very beginning to protect both the treasurer and the meeting.
Okay, well, I do serve as the treasurer for the Paoli Friends meeting. And so it's a very small meeting. So a lot of what I am telling you to do, we don't do because we're not large enough to have some of these checks and balances. But these checks and balances are to protect the church's resource as well as to protect the treasurer against false accusations. So they're not to be taken lightly. They are to be considered and utilized if at all possible. Number one is don't try to do it alone. You're dealing with cash. It's very easy to put some cash in your pocket and thinking no one is watching. But we have to remember that God is watching. But some of us may not feel that as much as others. So when it comes collection time, some of what I'm going to say may be repetitious with what I will be saying later because of the checks and balances. It's required with disbursements. It's required with collections. Is to have another person, have two people at the collection plate, whether it's the treasurer and one other person, or two other individuals and not the treasurer, to count the monies in the collection plate and agree on what is collected. There will be checks and there will be cash. So it's very important to keep that correct. When it comes to writing checks, again, it's very important that the treasurer not have the sole responsibility, the sole authority for paying bills. The treasurer must look at the budget to make sure that the payment is within the budget. And if it isn't a recurring expenditure, to make sure that somebody like a committee chairperson has authorized the payment of those checks. So to the extent possible, have a second individual involved with the incoming and the outgoing. You should always verify the deposits with the bank statements to make sure that what was collected was in fact deposited into the bank, that it matches the offering count. It's very important, and a lot of churches probably don't do this, is to send annual statements to their members of their contributions. Of course, cash can't be recorded, but checks can be. This is a good way for verification. If the member receives a contribution statement that is they feel is incorrect, could be an indication that some monies did not get deposited into the church. So that way you involve the member as the second person in that accountability. I believe each church should have a finance committee, which is separate and apart from the treasurer. And the finance committee should be looking at the financial statements that are prepared by the treasurer to look for possible variations that might indicate an issue or something that may need explanation. But there should be a second person, which I'm thinking is a committee, to review the treasurer's work.
So our next topic is looking at donations and other income that don't come in the offering plate, and if there are other things that we need to think about along with that.
Okay, again, the receipts should be categorized depending on the source of the contribution. It could be from the members, it could be from a memorial fund, it could be from an estate that is paying a memorial. Sorry about that. So it needs to be categorized by the giver. And then you can place it in the category according to your financial statement, your income categories, so that it is kept separate. You may receive designated funds, that is from members or from organizations, to give to the church for a designated opportunity, a designated purpose. They're going to give it for your outreach program specifically, not to be used for utilities, not to be used for anything other than what they designate it for. Those funds needs to be kept separate and accounted for separately. Some of them might expire over time. And if it isn't used in a given period of time, then contact should probably be made with the donor to determine if they want it refunded or if they will allow it to be used for other purposes. You may have funds designated for specific purposes by the members. That is completely different and within control of your membership. It could be that they are going to have a designated fund to replace the air conditioning. And if we don't get enough money or another urgent need comes up, we may need that money for something else. We would have to go back to the church board to determine if we can break that designation and use it for something else. It's very important to keep those designated funds separate in your records. It's not necessary, it's not required to keep them in a restricted bank account, just that they are designated as restricted in your books, and to make sure that you have enough funds in your bank account to cover those designated funds. So those are that income. If you have a parsonage or other real estate that maybe you rent, that needs to be kept separately. That is non-exempt income that is not part of the church business and could properly be required to be reported on an income tax return and paying income tax on it. So it's important for this non-exempt income to be kept separate so it can be tracked separate on an annual basis.
You had mentioned earlier about when we were just looking at the overview of the offering, that also when invoices or bills are paid, that there should be two people involved in that process as well.
Right.
Is there a process that you would recommend for receiving bills and invoices to make sure that they get where they need to be?
that's a lead into my next topic, which
Okay.
is paying bills. We skip over budget for the time being, and no, mine is next, the outgo.
Yep. Yep.
So yes, again, the treasurer, when they receive a bill, it quite well in my church, I'm the one that receives the mail. I get the bills. And if it is a recurring expense that's in the budget, utilities, that type of thing, it will be paid, and I don't ask anybody for permission. I do review it to make sure that it looks like last month's bill. We did have a situation where we were able to discover a water leak when our water bill went from $20 a month to $200 a month. So you can't just automatically pay the bill. You've got to look back and make sure that it's within reason, it's within the budget. Otherwise, it comes through a committee. And if I receive the bill, I will contact the committee chair to make sure that they have authorized it. If so, I will make a note as to our conversation. You could have a process where that committee person actually signs off a written signature that you have a memo that goes back and forth, whether it's by email or whatever, that they are authorizing the payment of that. Outreach contributions are a significant one of those, that you're going to give so much to certain charities in your outreach. You want to make sure that that's authorized by the committee. Now, in our church, that is a part of our budget. Our outreach committee specifies the organizations to receive the funds each year and how much they are to receive and whether they're to be paid monthly, quarterly, or annually. So those I don't necessarily receive an invoice. I just know that it's time, it's pre-authorized by the committee, it's in the budget, I write the checks. So some of that just depends upon your local congregation on how that is done. The checks, there was a question, should the checks have two signatures? Well, that, again, if you're paying budget bills, I don't think that's required. If it is a non-budget bill, then you probably need a signature either on the authorization or on the check. In our particular church, all checks in excess of $5,000 require two signatures on the check. We have monies in investment accounts. We have operating accounts. When the operating account gets low, the church has authorized me without an additional signature to move money from the investment account into the operating account strictly for the purpose of paying the bills. So once I get the authorization to pay the bills, then I take the money from wherever the money is available. But that may not be true. You may have to have a second signature to move money from an investment account. It is usually a good idea, again, considering oversight, that the finance committee should review those financial statements on an annual basis. Not only to look at the income and income sources, but to look at the expenses, to see that the expenses are in line and are properly recorded. So I think that is the basics when it comes to the outgo. Again, keeping in mind to protect the church's resources as well as to protect the treasurer.
Do you have any thoughts about when it makes sense for a church to use auto pay? Is that an appropriate thing to do if you have an expense that's always going to be regular? Say your electric bill is maybe on a budget plan. Would that be acceptable in your thinking?
We would consider auto pay, again, those recurring expenses that happen every month. I don't recommend auto pay with credit card statements
Mhm.
that a church might have. I didn't really address credit cards, but that is also an possible area of abuse.
Mhm.
Credit cards should be controlled. Only those people that have a need for the credit cards should have the credit cards. There should be adequate documentation for that credit card statement to be paid. By that, I mean something more than the credit card receipt. There needs to be an additional receipt other than just the credit card receipt that only shows the payee, the amount, and the date. It should be something that says what was purchased.
Mhm.
The auto pay with credit card statements, we don't support that at Paoli. But with recurring utility bills, that way, if I go on vacation, I know the utilities aren't going to get cut off.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn to Steve McDonald and Steve Blacketer and ask if you might share some of your words of wisdom about budgeting, creating the budget. What's the meeting, the church's responsibility, and what's your role as treasurer in the process, and how does that best work?
Go right ahead, Steve.
Well, what we do is we use the committees really to go back in and look at like your missions committees, and they kind of look at the budget. Really, for the most part, our committees set that up, and then the finance committee puts it all together as one budget, and then the responsibility of the treasurer is just to kind of look at it and make sure that it all, I would say, makes sense. Then the monthly meeting gets to approve it. And then obviously it's up to the members to donate enough money to make it. I think it's important to remember that a budget is kind of an expectation, is a kind of a hopeful, this is if everything goes right, this is what we hope to do. But I've never in the church or in the private sector seen a budget match at the end of the year what you thought it might look like at the beginning of the year. And so it's a guideline. And I think sometimes we forget that just because it's budgeted doesn't mean we have to spend it, and there'll be money that we will spend that wasn't budgeted. But your committees really having, and depends how large your church is, but really having your committees do their portion of the budgeting, I think makes the most sense because they're the ones that know what they're going to spend or what they want to do for programs in the coming year.
Yeah, I look at the budgeting process as more of a putting to paper what the church's vision is for the coming year and how are we going to get there. Be that outreach, the overhead of just maintaining a building, the cost of pastoral care, all of those major categories are what I think that budget needs to do. And with that, depending upon the relationship between the finance committee and the treasurer, they've kind of given you some pre-approved parameters. So when you start getting into the writing the checks, those kind of things, you kind of have some guidelines on what is, what, everyone thinks is an appropriate amount for a monthly charge for a water bill at $20 as opposed to one that's 200. It kind of gives you some additional information to make sure that everything is going as planned. The thing that I always use, and I've been involved in um, uh, corporate accounting in addition to public accounting, and there the budget is something that was a working tool which means that if circumstances changed sometime in our parameters, if something happened, we changed from gas to electric heat in a parsonage. It doesn't make sense to have a gas bill anymore, so we could adjust that number accordingly and move the electric bill up. It's a working tool uh, for that meeting for a year until a new one is completely started. Um, it's like I said, it's a tool, not to be something that we said, well, circumstances have changed, then why doesn't the budget change? Because we can't uh, ignore that fact for 6, 8 months until the next one comes along. That's um, not being very prudent of our resources.
I think it's also important to make sure that your budget line items actually make sense to the entire congregation. Sometimes you'll have a line item and we all know that it means most everybody knows what it means, but if you have a new person or somebody that moves into your church that isn't familiar with that, they can't understand, what that acronym stands for or something. So the simpler it is, the easier it is for people to understand it, and the better we have the line items. I mean, I still look at our budget sometimes and wonder what exactly is this going for again. And I think it's
Hmm.
important just to keep it um, as simple as we can, but yet explain exactly what that line item is for.
I think that's a good cautionary reminder. It's very easy to get into our own lingo and forget that maybe not everybody has any idea what it means.
Right.
So I'm going to toss it back to Steve Hayworth for talking about record keeping, and then on to Steve Blacketer for reporting.
I know to help with our budget process, I always maintain a 5-year spreadsheet of each of our income and each expenditure for each of those 5 years, so that as they do create the budget, they can look back and see what the history might be. Also give them some idea of the possible need for replacement, so that the record keeping is not always just for current information, as well as it is for historical information as well, to help in that process. Uh, there's obviously different ways to do it. The old manual system I don't recommend. It is very easy to make mistakes, very cumbersome, more difficult for others to understand. But in the very small congregations, that may be the way to do it. The spreadsheet would be the next level up. The issue with the spreadsheet is that you don't often know when something is missing. Um, but you have to make sure that all of the disbursements match the bank account, all of the deposits match the bank account, so that everything is recorded in the proper column in the spreadsheet. But then you've got to tie 12 months of spreadsheets together to get an annual report. If your board wants it more periodically, then again, you've got more work to do. Our meeting, we use QuickBooks, which isn't particularly designed for non-for-profits, but I find that I have enough experience with it that I have manipulated it. I can keep my designated funds separate, the member designations, the donor designations. I can keep all of that separate. And then we can also do a budget through QuickBooks and see how we perform compared to the budget. So QuickBooks is getting more and more expensive
That's,
but it is something that you could use. Quicken is another software that can be used. Again, it's not particularly designed for non-for-profits, but it can be organized that you could use non-for-profit with it. Sage has a software as well. It used to be called Peachtree. Now it's called Sage. It's also very user friendly. And then you have those specific softwares for churches. A couple that I found is Aplos, APLOS, for churches, and Simply Serve and Realm are three that are specific for churches. That will also help keep track of member contributions better than I think QuickBooks does. I do keep track of it through QuickBooks, but I think one of these others that are specific, more expensive, but software can really save time. But one also have to be careful. You have to know that software data in, if it is garbage, then data out is garbage. I am a CPA in private accounting. I had a client that used QuickBooks, had everything recorded neat in QuickBooks. But when you compared with the bank statements, the payees on the checks did not match the payee that was listed in QuickBooks. So they had entered the information manually in QuickBooks, but wrote the check to relatives. So you can't rely on software alone. You've got to do your checks and balances, look at the bank statements, look at the actual checks, compare this month with last month. And the software makes it easier to compare this month with last month with the year before. So I encourage all church treasurers to use software of some kind that will allow you to compare one period with another. Another thing I would like to mention in record keeping is payroll. That it's important to keep record keeping on payroll. Within the Quaker Church, within any church, the minister is normally considered an employee. I have seen quite often that churches will treat ministers as self-employed and issue them a 1099. If anything, they should be on a W-2. Ministers, there is no withholding of federal income tax, state income tax, Social Security, Medicare tax, but it is still a W-2 employee, which means they are eligible for any benefit programs that you might offer to employees, which could be health reimbursement, could be health insurance, could be a retirement plan. But a W-2 should be issued at the end of the year. If you do designate a parsonage allowance, which is allowed, you can designate, the church can designate in advance, has to be in advance, a portion of their salary to be used for parsonage allowance, which could be used for rent, which could be used for mortgage payment if the minister is buying a home, could be used for items within the home, furniture, could be used for light bulbs, toilet paper, for things that are used within the home, the parsonage allowance can be used for. And that would be non-taxable for federal and Indiana state tax. Would be taxable, yes, for Social Security and Medicare tax. So again, the record keeping would be important for that. If you do have payroll, you might have another employee. Maybe you've got a church organist that should be on payroll. Maybe you've got lay or associate pastors, that there could be other things. You may need the services of an outside accounting firm for your payroll services or for advice. So don't be afraid to ask for that advice and put that in your budget. If you need, it can save penalties and that type of thing. Records should be maintained for a period of 5 years. Um, just for the event that anyone wishes to suspect anything, that we have 5 years of proof available. If they are records that pertain to the acquisition of assets, for example, that should be maintained for 5 years after disposal of the asset. Again, for any possible questions or proof that might be necessary. All records should be secured. If it's computer records, then you need to make sure that you are protected online. If you're storing them on cloud, if you're storing them on your computer, make sure that your computer is protected against hacking or ransomware, anything else, because you do have sensitive information in there that needs to be protected. So other than that, I think that that is all that I have. If there's any other questions or any comments from Steve or Della, would be fine.
I think the only thing I would say is one thing I did learn, and I have served as a treasurer of a couple of organizations, is it's also very important to make sure you have a backup,
Back up,
just in case.
back up. Absolutely. I did forget to mention that. Yes.
Yeah, it's changed over the years. All of us seem to be, let's say, experienced. Let's put it that way. And from where Peachtree and QuickBooks was 30 years ago, where you were responsible for doing your own backup, with it being online now, things are much more secure to do that. Even with that, I still pull it off, do my own local backup every once in a while, just to make sure they don't have that once in a million time mistake. So, but I'm like you, Steve. I'm really fond of the accounting software packages. They're getting more and more expensive all the time. The thing that I would probably want to mention to any aspiring treasurer is to look at some of the sources of accounting software that can be had for a very nominal fee, because they are not for profits, and that is um, a thing that can save a meeting quite a bit of money, or any other not for profit.
And Della,
Yes.
I would mention in regards to backups, we back up twice every evening,
Mhm.
once to the cloud and once to an external hard drive in my office. So we
Mhm.
back up twice daily. It is critical. You're correct.
Yes. I have a story about one time when I was, and this was not financial, it was when it was in my work at the time. I was young out of college working in a business consulting firm doing word processing. And guess who didn't back up? And guess who had to redo all of her work from an entire day?
Yes.
And our client was coming in the morning, and two of my coworkers stayed and helped me recreate it. So I learned the really hard way. Over to you, Steve Blacketer, for talking about your wisdom on reporting to the monthly meeting, to finance committee or other entities, and external reports.
Okay, well, I think you have to kind of look at the audience, or at least in my opinion, the audience and their level of sophistication of how they might understand a financial statement. And a financial statement to the three of us uh, is the traditional balance sheet, income statement, maybe a comparison to a budget, to actual, some of those kind of things. Um, and some of those can be daunting, I guess, for the monthly meeting to uh, understand, absorb. You can kind of see as as being a prior treasurer. I'm not currently a treasurer of a meeting. Um, Seeing the the uh, the uh, the monthly meeting kind of glaze over, their eyes glaze over as you're starting to talk about numbers, and doing the old financial statement, what's generated basically out of QuickBooks, sometimes isn't the the best way. And because we're not dealing with outside parties, it's all internal. This goes back to my management accounting days. You're building a reporting system that is basically to the audience themselves. So rather than starting off with, you know, balance sheet, assets, cash, investments, and on down as what might be traditional, you may want to use an Excel spreadsheet to generate something that really speaks to what the people are concerned about within the meeting. So they may go through and say, here's what we've spent, here's what we took in, here's the deficit, or uh, the amount that we have to show for a profitable month. Uh, then relating on to, um, how does that pertain for the year? What was our expectations? All of those kind of things. So I think you kind of have to look at what they want to hear, or what they're concerned about, um, as far as the operations of what's going on, that kind of thing, and giving. This isn't. It can be very peak and valley type arrangements, especially now with that. Uh, all of the types of the ways that contributions can be received, uh, with qualified charitable distributions. A lot of times those are always heavy in the spring, new year, new money. Uh, those will come in. We look great for a few months, and then things start to catch up. Uh, so those are basically, qualified charitable distribution is basically a distribution from an IRA that passes through and is not taxed. And likewise, you don't get that charitable contribution on your tax return. But with the standard deduction, it's a very popular item for people to utilize that approach. Um, but the other things that are maybe the monthly meeting may not be quite as concerned about are the designated funds. And as Steve said earlier, in the record keeping, in the income, keeping track of those designated funds for a particular project, that air conditioner repair, roof repair, um, whatever the reason, are various things that I think the finance committee will always want to know, because being sitting on a trustees board now, we're constantly going to the finance committee for um, an air conditioner repair, anything along those lines. So just things that they have to be able to know what funds they have available to approve larger out of budget um, repairs that we have to address. Um, so that's um, that's the importance of those. Plus, just like you said, to keep them, uh, that they're used for the intended purpose, that they're designated um, use is done to the satisfaction of the donee. Um, External reports. Uh, there, I'm not sure what external reports that we as meetings may have. I'm sure we're more internal, uh, local. I don't know if reports are sent on to yearly meeting or not. Do you know, Steve?
I don't send any.
In
I'm
West,
I'm not aware of
Yeah.
any. So that's
Mm.
one of the things that within our Western Yearly Meeting that there's very little that is known that is done there. I think it's um, available if needed, but it's not I don't know of any reporting chain on that.
25 years ago, that was an expectation, but it isn't any longer. But I suspect in some other yearly meetings, it may still be an expectation. Um, and the other thing I was thinking of was on occasion, there might be small grants that either came from the yearly meeting or some kind of external a group that uh, those might need to be supplied for. And any tips you might have on that would be helpful.
Well, I think those that gets into it's the accounting is just like a large designated fund that just comes from a single source. So a grant is very easy to do, and in a lot of the cases, a grant is uh, they ask for an accounting of how their funds are used to make sure that they're used for the intended purpose.
One of the things that we do is we kind of keep a list of capital expenditures
Mhm.
because it's going to become more and more critical. I've been working with the insurance companies to redo insurance, and one of my non-for-profits got rejected because of the age of the roof. At Westfield Friends, we could actually give them the dates when the roofs were redone, and so they went ahead and we changed with them. But insurance companies are wanting to know the exact date the roofs were redone, and they're starting to change how they write their policies, so they no longer will replace a roof if it's damaged. It's more like when you damage a tire and you've got 40,000 miles on it, then they prorate it for you.
Yes,
And that's going to become more and more critical. So, like, when did we replace that furnace or that air conditioner? We are
right. That
unlucky enough to have 10 furnaces and 10 air conditioners. And so it's kind of nice to, because I thought it happened last year, but when you look back to the records, it happened like 5 years ago. And we just, sometimes we have no concept of time when we've replaced a roof, on the parsonage or something like that. And so it's nice just to have that running list there to look at
I think
instead of
that,
sending somebody back to see when we wrote a check for roofs, was it
right.
4 years, 5 years, or 6 years ago, Don't
He
know.
brings up a
I
really good point.
I think there's some individuals within the yearly meeting that are doing just that for the yearly meeting
Yes.
buildings and having a physical asset uh, uh, record keeping for that and the the yearly meeting office building and that kind of thing, just for that very purpose, Steve. Yes.
It's also one of those points where it becomes very important about how we coordinate with, regardless of how your meeting's set up. I mean, I know some meetings have trustees who cover both finance and property, and others break that out, but making sure that the communication among all those folks is really good and that somebody really is keeping that kind of listing makes a big difference, because that will become increasingly important for insurance and other purposes too. As we have aging buildings, it makes a big it's a big deal whether you have a 20-year-old roof or a 5-year-old roof. It might have a big impact on your budget. So we are getting close to time, so I'm going to just ask us to quickly think about some other topics, just list out some other topics that we know we want to talk about in possible future times. And I'm going to list a few, and then if you want to throw in some other topics that you think might be important, let's list that. And then I was hoping that we'll be able to talk about things beyond the checkbook. In other words, investment CDs, donor software, online giving, those kinds of things that are not, you don't have to know that to get started as a treasurer, but it's really helpful to have some knowledge of those things, as well as thinking about how we work with others. For instance, the finance committee, the trustees, the assistant treasurers, a stewardship committee, um, committee clerks, especially outreach committees. I know for a lot of our friends' meetings, the outreach committee probably may generate more checks per year than any other group. The monthly meeting clerk, pastor, if there is one, office staff, ushers, those kinds of folks. And then I know one thing I hope we can spend some time on in the future is how to help treasurers know when they need to ask for professional help and what kind of professional help. Because I think it's too easy to think, oh, we'll figure it out. And sometimes it's easy to get in over one's head, and that's not helpful. It's better to know the early warning signs and to say, yes, I really need a professional. And for our meetings to understand that's not treasurers abdicating their responsibility. It's being responsible, and sometimes we have to put money in for it. And that was my little sermon for the day. I invited the three Steves to come and be part of this conversation and to provide great content, because I have learned things from each one of them about how to help those of us that maybe it's not our everyday thing to think about budgets and reporting and the ins and outs of being a treasurer. So thank you, Steve, and Steve.